Everyone, welcome back to the channel on this wild Tuesday where the soap world is literally spinning off its axis right now because what we just witnessed is beyond anything we could have prepared for. We thought we were just getting a corporate fashion war, but we got a literal life or death tragedy instead, and my mind is completely blown by the sheer intensity of the performances we just watched. Brooke Logan Forrester marched into that Logan office like she owned the place and like she owned her daughter's soul, which is something she has always struggled with because Brooke cannot separate her own desires from what Hope actually wants and needs in her life. She stood there in that sleek, modern office that Katie and Bill built, and she just unleashed years of projected insecurities onto Hope, who was already looking so pale and so fragile, standing there under the weight of this massive secret she had been carrying for weeks. Brooke was screaming about loyalty and betrayal and how Hope walking down that runway wearing the Hope for the Future diamond was a personal attack on her and on Ridge and on the entire Forrester legacy, which is just so ridiculous when you think about it, because Hope is a grown woman trying to make her own way in an industry that constantly tries to put her in a box. The words just kept flying out of Brooke's mouth like venomous darts hitting their target over and over again until she finally dropped the absolute worst bomb a mother could ever drop on her child by screaming that she was going to disown her forever. Forever. Just like that. You could actually see the exact millisecond where Hope's spirit just completely shattered into a million pieces right there on the pristine hardwood floor of the Logan Fashion House. She didn't even argue back or raise her voice because her body was already failing her in ways that nobody in that room could possibly understand yet. And the sheer amount of stress she had been under from hiding this contract and dealing with Steffi's relentless bullying had finally reached a boiling point. Hope's eyes just sort of rolled back into her head and the color completely drained from her beautiful face as she swayed for a second before collapsing like a rag doll right at her mother's feet. It was horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. Liam was standing right there, and the sound that came out of his mouth was this guttural scream of pure terror because he had just been telling Katie and Bill how proud he was of his wife, and now she was a heap on the floor, not moving and barely breathing. He dropped to his knees so fast he probably bruised them, but he didn't care because he was frantically checking her pulse and screaming her name over and over again while the entire office just descended into absolute chaos. He didn't wait for an ambulance because every single second felt like an eternity, and he just scooped her up in his arms and bolted out the door with this frantic, desperate energy that only a husband terrified of losing his entire world could possess. Blood roaring in his ears, pure panic. Brooke was just frozen. She literally stood there like a statue carved out of pure regret and horror with her hand hovering over her mouth while she stared at the empty space on the floor where her daughter had just been lying unconscious. The contrast between her vicious screaming rage just 30 seconds prior and this sudden suffocating silence was so stark and so punishing that you almost felt bad for her, but then you remember what she just said and you realize she brought this on herself. Did she cause this? Did her cruel, unforgiving words actually trigger a physical collapse? She couldn't move or speak or even breathe, as the realization of what she had just done washed over her in this massive tidal wave of maternal guilt that is going to haunt her for the rest of her natural life. She broke her own daughter. The scene shifted to the emergency room, and the sensory details were just so overwhelming with the harsh fluorescent lights and the smell of bleach and the chaotic sound of doctors shouting medical jargon as they rushed Hope away on a gurney while Liam was physically held back by a nurse. You could feel the sterile coldness of that hospital pressing down on Liam as he paced the waiting room floor like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair and praying to whatever higher power would listen that his wife was going to open her eyes and smile at him again. The waiting is always the worst part because your mind just goes to the darkest possible places. And Liam has already been to the darkest places a parent and a husband can go. So his mind was just a tornado of worst case scenarios. Then the doctor walked out with this grim expression that instantly sucked all the oxygen out of the room. And you just knew before he even opened his mouth that the news was going to be completely devastating. He looked Liam dead in the eye and delivered a diagnosis that nobody saw coming. And that changes the trajectory of this entire show because Hope is pregnant, but it's an ectopic pregnancy. A literal ticking time bomb inside her fallopian tube that is threatening to rupture at any second and end her life right there on the operating table if they don't intervene immediately. The tragedy of it is so heavy you can barely breathe just thinking about it. Liam's agony in that moment was so visceral and so raw that it felt like an invasion of privacy just watching it through the television screen because he was being forced to process the joy of a new baby and the immediate death that baby all in the same agonizing breath. The doctor explained that the embryo could not survive outside the uterus and that Hope was actively bleeding internally, which meant Liam had to make the impossible, agonizing choice to authorize the emergency surgery that would save his wife, but terminate the pregnancy. They didn't even know they had. How do you even make that choice? You choose your wife, of course, but the emotional weight of actively signing the paperwork to end your unborn child's existence to save the woman you love is a trauma that Liam Spencer is going to carry in his bones forever. He just fell apart against the hospital wall, sliding down to the linoleum floor and sobbing into his hands because this man has already lost so much, and he and Hope have already been through the absolute ringer when it comes to their children. We all remember the nightmare of losing Beth and the months of agonizing grief that nearly destroyed them both. And now they are being forced to walk through the fires of hell all over again. But this time, Hope might not even survive the journey. He just got her back on track and he just saw her shining so brightly on that Logan runway. And now she is bleeding out in a sterile surgical suite while he sits helplessly in a hallway. It is just so unfair. When Brooke finally arrived at the hospital, she looked like a ghost of her former self, stumbling through the double doors with tears streaming down her face and her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold her purse. She saw Liam on the floor, and the look he gave her was so full of pure, unadulterated hatred and blame that she actually physically recoiled as if he had struck her across the face. She realized in that exact moment that the fashion war and Forrester Creations and Katie's success and Eric's stolen designs and Ridge's approval meant absolutely nothing. None of it matters. Not a single thread of couture matters when your child is fighting for her life. The absolute absurdity of the corporate war they have been waging over the past few weeks is just so glaringly obvious now, because who cares about a runway show or a press conference when your daughter is having emergency surgery for a ruptured ectopic pregnancy? A diamond means nothing. A logo means nothing. Brooke has spent all this energy trying to force Hope back into a box at Forrester just to appease Steffi and Ridge. And she completely lost sight of the fact that Hope is a human being with a fragile body and a fragile heart. Brooke's obsession with loyalty to the Forrester name has literally pushed her daughter to the brink of death. And the crushing weight of that guilt is going to fundamentally change who Brooke is as a character moving forward. While all this is happening in the waiting room, you have to wonder what is going on in Hope's subconscious state as the anesthesia pulls her under and the surgeons scramble to save her life and stop the internal bleeding. Is she dreaming of that runway? Is she dreaming of the baby she will never get to hold? The physical toll of the stress she has been under from Steffi's ultimatums and Ridge's disappointment and Zenday's anger all culminated in this catastrophic medical emergency. And it is just so heartbreaking to think about how alone she must have felt carrying all that anxiety. She finally stepped out of the Forrester shadow to create life in a new brand, only to face the death of her unborn child in the most traumatic way possible. The surgical intervention itself is a ticking clock of pure suspense, and the writers are doing an incredible job of making us feel every excruciating second as Liam and Brooke sit in that waiting room without saying a word to each other. Because what is there even left to say? Brooke wants to comfort him, but she knows she has lost the right to even touch him because she is the one who pushed Hope over the edge with her cruel threat of disownment. Can you even imagine saying those words to your child and then watching them collapse. The regret must be tasting like ash in Brooke's mouth right now, and she deserves every single ounce of that pain for being so incredibly short-sighted and selfish. This tragedy is going to send massive shockwaves through the entire canvas of Los Angeles, because how is Steffi going to react when she hears that the woman she has been plotting to destroy is currently fighting for her life in the ICU? Will the Forrester fury melt into family solidarity, or is the bad blood just too toxic at this point to ever be washed away? Steffi knows what it is like to lose a child, and she knows what it is like to fight for her life. So you have to hope that this will snap her out of her vindictive corporate revenge plot and make her realize that family is more important than a fashion label. But then again, this is Steffi we are talking about, and her hatred for the Logans runs deep. Katie and Bill are going to be absolutely devastated when they get the news, because the Logan office is now essentially a crime scene of emotional abuse perpetrated by Brooke, and they are going to feel so guilty for putting Hope in the middle of their war with Forrester. Bill is going to rally around Liam with everything he has, because Bill knows how to protect his sons, and he is going to make damn sure that Brooke Logan never gets within 10 feet of Hope again if Liam has anything to say about it. The dynamic between the Logan sisters is already fractured, but this might actually be the thing that breaks Brooke and Katie's relationship permanently, because Katie will never forgive Brooke for doing this to Hope in her office. And what about Deacon? His daughter is lying on an operating table, bleeding internally, while he is off dealing with Sheila's insane demands for visitation and trying to build a life with Taylor. When Deacon finds out that Brooke threatened to disown their daughter right before she collapsed, he is going to unleash a level of fury on Brooke that we haven't seen in years, because Deacon has always been fiercely protective of Hope, even when he was messing up his own life. The ripple effects of this ectopic pregnancy are going to touch every single character on this show and force them to reevaluate all of their petty grievances and corporate squabbles. The aftermath of the surgery is going to be a long and agonizing road for Hope and Liam, because even if she survives the physical trauma, the emotional scars of losing this baby are going to be permanent. They are going to have to grieve a child they didn't even know they were expecting, while navigating the terrifying reality that Hope's fertility might be permanently compromised by the rupture. This is the kind of deep emotional storytelling that this soap excels at, and it is going to require some incredibly nuanced performances from the cast as they explore the messy, complicated layers of grief and trauma and blame. Can Hope ever forgive Brooke for the words she said right before she collapsed? When you are standing on the edge of the abyss and the last thing you hear from your mother is that she is disowning you because of a business decision that is a wound that does not heal, with a simple apology, Brooke is going to have to grovel and beg and completely strip away her ego if she ever wants to have a relationship with her daughter again. But honestly, it might be too late. The trust is completely broken, and Liam is going to make sure that Brooke is held accountable for every single tear that Hope sheds over this loss. Liam's vow to protect Hope from her own mother is going to create a massive shift in the family dynamics, because Liam has always been the peacemaker who tries to see everyone's side, but this time he is drawing a hard line in the sand. He is going to ban Brooke from the hospital room, and he is going to fiercely guard Hope's recovery. And it is going to drive Brooke absolutely insane to be shut out, but she has no one to blame but herself. This is the bed she made, and now she has to lie in it while her daughter fights to recover from a tragedy that Brooke's cruelty helped precipitate. The shift in the show's narrative from a flashy corporate fashion war to a deeply personal human tragedy is jarring, but it is exactly what this storyline needed to ground it in real emotional stakes. We were getting so caught up in who was designing what and who was stealing whose logo that we forgot these are human beings with fragile lives that can be shattered in an instant. The runway lights have dimmed and the hospital monitors are beeping, and the reality of Hope's mortality is staring everyone right in the face. It is going to be a rough couple of weeks for all of us watching at home as we follow Hope's journey through this medical crisis and the subsequent grief of losing her baby. We are going to need a lot of tissues and a lot of emotional support as we watch Liam and Hope try to piece their shattered hearts back together while the rest of the family deals with the fallout of their toxic behavior. The fashion war means nothing. The legacy means nothing. All that matters now is that Hope survives and that Liam can find a way to carry them both through this unimaginable darkness.